My name is Dr. Donna Roberts, and this presentation is about students of the future and faculty of the future, how we can adapt teaching and learning to a new generation of scholars. The landscape of higher education is rapidly changing. As the amount of technical information doubles every 2 years, technology is taking us to places we only dreamed of before. But in doing so, is also making demands on us that we have never faced before. Change is everywhere, at all levels and in all contexts. The labor market and work environment for which we are preparing students is certainly changing. The U.S. Department of Labor estimates that today's learner will have 10 to 14 jobs by the age of 38. Most of the top in-demand jobs today did not even exist merely 10 years ago. And 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 haven't been invented yet. The amount of new technical information doubles every 2 years. This means for students starting a 4-year technical degree, half of what they study in their first year will be outdated by their 3rd year. And on a larger scale, we are currently preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist, using technologies that haven't been invented in order to solve problems we don't even know are problems yet. If we endeavor just to tell students what we know in order for them to be able to do what we have done, then we have seriously misunderstood the task required of higher education in the 21st century. According to one report by Dell Technologies, the pace of change will be so rapid that people will learn in the moment, using new technologies such as augmented reality and virtual reality. The ability to gain new knowledge will be more valuable than the knowledge itself. So this is what we must now teach, not the specific knowledge of this fleeting moment in time, but rather how to discover and synthesize new knowledge. Students, too, are changing. According to Mark Prensky, educational writer and speaker, who coined the terms digital immigrant and digital native, today's students are no longer the people our educational system was designed to teach. So who are they, and how are they different? In the classrooms of our universities, both brick and mortar and virtual, we are ushering in new generations of students who are changing the very definition of education and changing the world. The millennials, also called Gen Y, represent the generation born from approximately 1975 to 1995. The date ranges for generations are not set in stone and often vary by a few years in different literature. So, for example, some say 1980 to 2000 for the millennials. In any event, this means that as a group, they would have started entering college around the mid-90s and currently make up a large portion of the student body in universities. Centennials, or Gen Z, represent the generation following the millennials, born approximately from 1995 to 2015, and they started entering college in the past couple of years. So let's take a look at the millennials. As a generation, millennials have been frequently, publicly, and harshly criticized as selfish, demanding, and entitled. Of course, it's important to remember that these are very broad generalizations that do not take into consideration all of the variables of human experience, and thus may or may not represent the characteristics of any particular individual of that generation. In general, it is commonly noted that millennials stay close to the parents through college and turn to their parents for help when organizations don't meet their needs. They have helicopter parents who hover over them to ensure their well-being and competitive advantage, particularly at educational institutions. And/or snowplow parents who clear the way for them, removing obstacles and solving their problems. Also, with respect to their upbringing, many baby boomer parents allowed their millennial children to have input into family decisions, educational options, and discipline issues. Thus, they feel they have the right to negotiate with anyone, including parents, professors, and school administrators. While this was their status quo growing up, to traditional authority figures, this feels disrespectful, insubordinate, and non-compliant. Other generalizations about millennials, based on the stereotypical upbringing and sociocultural conditions, include the notions that millennials expect that everything is negotiable, that they will be allowed continuous trial and error until they achieve the desired outcome, and that they will have a voice in every decision that affects them. Millennials expect and need praise, along with clear, detailed, and frequent feedback. They will interpret silence as a lack of approval. With respect to education, millennials are considered to have experienced less academic demands in school than previous generations, with many doing little homework for their good grades throughout high school. Because of programs such as social promotion, they may have been functioning below grade level since early elementary school without ever being aware of it. As such, college faculty may be the first strict grader they have ever encountered. They are considered to be not very hardy and will quit or drop out because it's too hard. Again, I want to emphasize that these are generalizations and represent common stereotypes about millennials. Given this as their world experience, they expect the same minimal demands in college. They are not accustomed to managing their own time and thus are typically not good planners and tend towards lateness if allowed. They tend to have unrealistically high expectations of success, combined with a surprisingly low level of effort on their part. And they often enroll in courses they aren't prepared for. This quote sums up much of the sentiment about millennials in higher education. For college faculty, this generation can be challenging to deal with. Millennials view higher education as an expensive but economically necessary consumer good, not a privilege earned by hard work and outstanding performance. They, or their parents, purchase it for the instrumental purpose of opening well-paying occupational doors on graduation, so they feel entitled to their degree for the cost of the credits. Let's turn our attention to Generation Z. Gen Z represents a cohort that doesn't remember a world without smartphones, social media, and instantly available information. All technology, all the time, and born digital are descriptors of this generation. Raised in a school system that focuses on mainstreaming and classroom diversity, as well as the ubiquitous inclusion of technology. For Gen Z, learning is one continuous, multifaceted, completely integrated experience, connecting social, academic, and professional interests. Zs feel comfortable in front of a screen. A majority prefer a digital format when reading, studying, taking notes, and doing problem sets. That preference for digital was most emphatic when it came to doing research, with 92% saying they preferred working on a screen. 41% spend greater than 3 hours per day on their computers in non-school work-related activities, compared to only 22% a decade ago. They don't want to influence their education. They want to co-create it. Centennials are independent, self-reliant, and not as dominated by helicopter parents as the millennials. Studies have shown that they have an 8-second attention span, down from 12 seconds in 2000 for Generation Y. This is often compared to that of a goldfish, which is 9 seconds. While often criticized, this has also been considered to be a well-developed, efficient filtering system that allows them to quickly evaluate stimuli and determine that which deserves further attention, a skill certainly necessary in their information-saturated environments. As UCLA student Hannah Payne told the New York Times, Generation Z takes in information instantaneously and loses interest just as fast. Social media has become a primary source for educational research. To capitalize on Gen Z's ability to self-educate and co-create content, traditional learning materials need to be supplemented and enhanced with digital opportunities. Gen Z is a generation of true digital natives. They have adopted a technology-centric lifestyle and regularly use 5 different computer tools for their social and educational purposes: laptops, desktops, tablets, smartphone, and TVs or video game consoles. They define themselves in online digital terms and do not distinguish between devices or online territories. It is one continuous, multifaceted, completely integrated experience, connecting social, academic, and professional interests. Gen Zs consume information quickly on multiple platforms and screens. They prefer information to be served in bite sizes, and they live in an on-demand world, having little patience for latency, and they do not absorb information because they know they can Google anything they need to know. So what do these modern students want and expect from us as their educators? Millennials anticipate clear expectations, explicit syllabi, and well-constructed assignments. They expect detailed instructions and guidelines for completing these assignments. Remember, they have come from K-12 systems where students were actively involved in learning and classroom activities changed often. Teachers are helpers and facilitators of learning, in their view. They want to have input into their educational processes. Millennials value communication and information. They need to understand why they are doing what they are doing, and they want to be involved in meaningful activities, not mundane work. They respond well when we explain the objectives of classroom activities and projects and why we use the teaching and assessment methods we do. Centennials, as digital natives, are used to receiving information very quickly. They like to parallel process and multitask. They prefer graphics before their text rather than the opposite, and they prefer random access like hypertext. They function best when networked. They thrive on instant gratification and frequent rewards, and they learn through games and game-like interactions. Gen Z students tend to thrive when they are given the opportunity to have a fully immersive educational experience. 51% of surveyed students said they learn best by doing, while only 12% said they learn through listening. These same students also mentioned that they tend to enjoy class discussions and interactive classroom environments over the traditional dissemination teaching method. 72% say they want a more customized college experience in which colleges allow students to design their own course of study or major. Nearly 2/3 say it's an extremely important or very important that colleges teach students about entrepreneurship. Nearly 8 in 10 prefer that education programs be integrated with practical experience, such as internships with employers. How does this compare to traditional pedagogy and faculty expectations? Traditionally, in education, There have been lecture classes with a sage on the stage, reading assignments from printed books, pen and paper note-taking, working primarily individually rather than in groups, quiet independent study or work time, face-to-face classrooms, acceptance of professional authority, limited access to faculty, and the expectation that decisions will be accepted without challenge. Traditionally, digital immigrant instructors who speak an outdated language, that of the pre-digital age, are struggling to teach a population that speaks an entirely new language. Continuing with the language metaphor, as digital immigrants learn to adapt to their environment, they always retain, to some degree, their accent, that is, their foot in the past. They turn to the internet as a second choice. They like reading the manual, and they often print out email or a document to edit. Additionally, we bring certain assumptions. Digital immigrants don't believe their students can learn successfully while watching TV, playing games, or listening to music, because they, the immigrants, can't. But of course they can't. They didn't practice this skill constantly for all of their formative years. They didn't multitask. It's not how they learned. Digital immigrants think learning can't or shouldn't be fun. Why should they? They didn't spend their formative years with Sesame Street. Clearly, many of these traditional ways of thinking and operating need to change to meet the changing environment and the changing needs of the students. These new generations offer new challenges as well as new opportunities. Today's students refuse to be passive learners. They aren't interested in simply showing up for class, sitting through a lecture, and taking notes that they'll memorize for an exam later on. Instead, they expect to be fully engaged and to be a part of the learning process themselves. As we think about all these changes, it becomes clear that the set of skills that served previous generations will not adequately address the new generation of students, the new challenges they face, or the new changing environment in which they find themselves. As described by Dr. Michael Wesch, critical thinking, the old mainstay of higher education, is no longer enough to prepare our youth for this world. We must create learning environments that inspire a way of being in the world in which they can harness and leverage this new media environment, as well as recognize and actively examine, question, and even recreate the increasingly digital structures that shape our world. Millennials and Generation Z are becoming the focus of higher education policy and institution reform. Higher education has made its entrance on the political agenda. Policymakers take note. A new generation of Americans is on the rise, highly entrepreneurial, pluralistic, and determined to take charge of their own futures. While generational diversity brings a variety of experiences and perspectives to the institution, the differing needs and values of each generation must be addressed in order to ensure the ultimate goal of preparing students for the future they will face. Because many professors work well into their 70s, teaching students barely into their 20s, college campuses, perhaps more than any other organizations, require ongoing interaction among generations. The accelerated pace of change results in a broader and more urgent role and mission of higher education. Greater numbers than ever before will turn to higher education to meet a wide variety of needs, many of which cannot yet be anticipated. The field of education has the task of responding to, facilitating the transition into, and generally moderating the application and delivery of new innovation within society. British statesman Benjamin Disraeli so passionately stated back in the 1800s, "Upon the education of the people of this country, the fate of this country depends. Today, as we have expanded into a global society, this sentiment has even broader application. The students we educate today will change the world tomorrow. Let's prepare them well. Thank you.